some of you know Brian Sachs, the pastor here at the Bainbridge Community United Church of Christ, right? What's Brian
George.
saxophone, but with
George
me
is
at
my
the end.
friend.
So he's going to give a presentation that David explains today, and we appreciate him for that. I will be doing the next one in December on the 14th. Thank you, Nelson. On the Monroe Doctrine.
Oh.
Yes. So it should be in the newsletter, I think. Yeah, it is. Okay. So I'm going to turn it over to Brian. If you need something to drink, let myself or Laura and Carrie know. Otherwise, I'll turn the floor over to Brian.
Hello. Like David said, I'm the pastor here, Brian Sachs. A while ago, I told David I'd do one of these, and then we got switching around. So finally, I walked up to him and was like, "Hey, how about I do finally do the presentation I owe you?" And he said, "Sure, what on?" I said, "The Book of Revelation." And he went, "Oh." So, which is most people's reaction to the Book of Revelation, because it's just so weird, right? I mean, when you read it, there's a lot of crazy stuff in there. You got creatures with eyeballs inside and out. You got lambs running around. You got the end of the world and all this violence, and supposedly God's doing all this violence. It's just kind of nuts. So what we're going to do today is kind of go through more of the historical approach, reading this through the eyes of how it was written, what it was originally written about, what it was originally intended to say and do. So before that, though, when it comes to this kind of, oh, thank you, sir. When it comes to this kind of work, apocalypse and apocalyptic and all that things, especially the Book of Revelation, it's a very visual thing, right? It's about how we can engage our imagination and perhaps the more left side of our brain in thinking about the world and what's around us. So with that, we'll begin where everybody assumed we would, I'm sure. So my question to you all is, what do you think is being conveyed in this artwork? What does it make you think of?
Agony.
Agony?
Or bad hair. Or a bad hair day. People die. Why are they chasing
People
me?
dying on casual, so I think he's in a psychedelic.
Mushrooms?
I can't take anymore.
What about this?
A tree of lights. I see ornaments.
Mm-hmm.
That's supposed to be the tree of life outside.
Mm. These are both two very abstract images, right? It's not clear cut. It's not completely dry. You gotta think through it. Part of it is, what is the experience, right? That's all abstract modern art. What does it make you think? How does it make you feel? So what do you think of when you hear the word apocalypse? End of the world?
I change.
Change?
Disaster.
Disaster? Well, the word apocalypse actually comes from the Greek word, not a Hebrew word, Greek word, apocalypsis, and it actually means revelation. The actual word itself in the Greek has nothing to do with the end of the world, violence, revelation. Hence why the apocalypsis to John is revelation to John. An apocalypse is actually a genre. Especially around the first century, Second Temple period of Israel, lots of this is going on. If you Google around, you can check out a book called Fourth Enoch. If you think Revelation is trippy, you should definitely check that one out. But Daniel, the book of Daniel, is also an apocalypse. And the goal of an apocalypse is to truly get you to think. Not about the future and what's coming, but to get you to think, to get the people it was written to, let's be clear, the people it was written to think about their present situation from a different perspective. In an apocalypse, in this kind of genre, what you have is some type of divine figure revealing secrets to usually some type of biblical hero, right? So for this instance, we have John. Now, the language of Revelation or apocalypses in general is never really clear-cut. And that's for a specific reason that we'll get into later. So you can't really read it as, kind of like a Dick and Jane book. It's not see Jesus save Jesus save, right? It's designed to get you to really think. It's designed to get you to step outside of your conscious mind, of your routine thoughts, and look at things a different way. So, and above all, it uses intensely visual, imaginative, symbolic language to make its theological point. To put it simply, the weirder it gets, the more meaningful it is. So, what is the book of Revelation for besides just getting someone to step outside of their thoughts? Well, it's designed and written to 7 churches in Asia Minor. We're pretty sure in the late 1st century. Now, why do we think that? Well, because it says that. Right? The beginning, we'll get through the narrative outline here in a minute. But it says to the 7 churches in Asia Minor, and it lists them. Boom, boom, boom. Right? So, we know that because it says it. We'll get into also some of the dating as we get through some of the symbolism and walking through that. But it's also aimed to make a theological point, right? And we can really begin to wrap our heads around that when we look at the last church. So there's 7 churches. Some of them get stellar reviews from the author. Some of them C+, D-, but the last church gets an F. Now, why does it get an F? I know your works. You are neither cold nor hot. I wish that you were either cold or hot. So because you are lukewarm and neither cold nor hot, I'm about to spit you out of my mouth. For you say, I am rich, I have prospered, and I need nothing. You do not realize that you are wretched, pitiable, poor, blind, and naked. Therefore I counsel you to buy from me gold refined by fire, so that you may be rich, and white robes to clothe you, and to keep the shame of your nakedness from being seen, and salve to anoint your eyes so that you may see. I reprove and discipline those whom I love. Be earnest, therefore, and repent. Now they're in trouble, not because they're doing the wrong thing, because they're doing nothing. Apocalypses are very black and white thinking, right? It's the good guys and the bad guys. It's like a 1950s Western, okay? There's no ambiguity. And when it comes to the revelation to John, the good guys are the guys who have complete fidelity to at least John's vision of what it means to serve the God as revealed by Jesus. Everybody else who's either lukewarm or completely off track or even maybe a little bit off track. Well, a little bit off track, they need to get their acts together. Notice he says, I'm writing this not to condemn you, but to wake you up. But everybody who's on the other side is on the side of the Roman Empire. And as we get through, like I said, we're getting the symbolism and the narrative outline, that'll come to the forefront more and more. But this is really about people in a time and place when you have not widespread throughout the whole empire oppression, but systematic oppression by the empire on these communities because they are followers of Jesus. And like I said, we'll get into that a little more here. So, just because I'm sure not everybody, reads this book every night and knows the whole story heart by heart, we'll go through a quick outline here. So first, the very beginning, we have the revelation of Jesus Christ is communicated to John of Patmos through prophetic visions. He begins to have visions. First, he has the Son of Man, or a person who is as the Son of Man, show up and say, basically, hi, John, I need you to write down some things for me, and we got to ship it off to these churches. So after that, we have the messages to the 7 churches, which you heard the last one. I read that. So that's when they all get their report cards. Then we start to get the visions, right? These narrative scenes, vignettes. The first is before the throne of God. It's the heavenly court. This is an old school image that goes back to the late Bronze Age, right? The idea is that what happens here is reflected in heaven. So kings have court, God's going to have a court because it's God, right? So we go into the throne. There are people bowing down to God. There's the 4 heavenly creatures, which we'll get into here in a minute. And also, this is when we get the first appearance of the Lamb. And the Lamb gets a scroll that has 7 seals. So then we hear the 7 seals are opened. Things start to happen. We're deconstructing the world. And then we get a little interlude. Now you might notice some repetition here. And the people of God are all sealed. So the people who have held on, who are right with God, they get special marks. Then the 7 trumpets are sounded. And we get another little vignette. This time about a little scroll. And the little scroll has some interesting things. And I'm not stalling for time at all. So the little scroll is all about one of the angels that's been popping up throughout this thing. Says, oh, John, here's a scroll for you. It has secret mysteries. And John eats it. Because that's what you do. That doesn't even offer him ketchup, but he has to eat it. And he says, it is sweet in his mouth, but bitter in his stomach, to prophesy. He's given a measuring rod, so we start to get Temple of God imagery, start to get Holy City imagery, and then we have 2 witnesses that come to prophesy. So that little vignette ends, and we have, can anyone guess? There we go, 7 something, 7 trumpets this time. And the 7th we already had the trumpets, but then the 7th trumpet blows, and now we get the 7 bowls. And then we get an interlude, we get another little story with 7 spiritual figures. So it's called the woes. All 7 of these 3 things are the woes. And these spiritual figures vignette, we'll get into kind of detailing them more. But it begins with a pregnant woman who's about to give birth. She's in a white robe, the sun's at her back, the moon's at her feet. So this is cosmic stuff, right? A great dragon comes. And the dragon waits for her to give birth because he's going to eat the baby. But the woman flees, she runs off. Luckily, the angel Michael shows up, entering from stage left, battles the dragon. There's a whole heavenly war, and the dragon is cast down to earth. And that's when we start to get the beasts of Revelation, who we'll get into, the beast with 7 heads and 10 horns, the beast of the sea, and then we got the beast of the land. We'll get into him in a minute. He shows up, shouting blasphemies and marks of beasts. And then the 7 bowls are poured on the earth. And then we get the aftermath. Vision of John given to the angels. So what happens in the aftermath? The Son, the one who's like the Son of Man, comes, reaps the earth. We get scenes of the heavenly tabernacle. People who have died get to come up. It's very nice. Oh, and we also have the great harlot, the whore of Babylon. Anybody heard of her? She shows up in pop culture sometimes. She rides around on the beast looking all cool. Michael shows up with the angels. Boom! War. Babylon is destroyed. The people of earth mourn Babylon's destruction. And then it talks about the permanence of Babylon's destruction. We have a new scene, a marriage scene, where the lamb gets hitched. It's a nice wedding, good food. Then the judgment of the 2 beasts, the dragon and the dead. The big judgment scene where the lamb, Jesus, the white rider, sits on the throne and judges the quick and the dead. Right? We've all seen that Clint Eastwood movie. And then we get the whole point, which is a new heaven and a new earth. Because that's also the biggest part about apocalypses that we have to keep in mind when we're reading this stuff, is they're not written to people waiting for all the bad stuff to happen. Like I said, this was written to a people who were experiencing the oppression, who were experiencing the bad stuff. And as we talk about the beast of the land, we'll begin to understand why they feel like, you know what, they're in the middle of everything falling apart. They feel like they're living in this time when these bowls of destruction are being poured and everything's just breaking loose. So the whole point is to remind them to hang on. Because who's in control? Who's in control over all this?
Say God.
God. That's the point of John. I mean, that's within the text, that's the whole point, right? Who's calling the shots in all this? God. You know, Satan gets to plays his part, but at the end of the day, he's not in control. God's in control. And the whole point is that after all of this decreation, there is going to be recreation. And in that recreated order, it's going to be all gravy, baby. There's going to be a shining city. There's going to be gates of all these majestic, expensive gemstones. There's going to be food. There's going to be sleeping, good music. It'll always have something good on TV. Great stuff. Okay? So again, these are some of the things we have to keep in mind as we're going through it, because otherwise, like I said, it gets weird, it gets overwhelming, and we don't want to engage with it when really it's got some very interesting things to say. So let's get into the characters, right? Everybody talks about the code of Revelation, and it's true, stuff is coded. Now, is it easy for us to grasp the code? Absolutely not. This was written 2,000 years ago. It's hard for us to grasp people talking about things 100 years ago or 200 years ago. So it takes a lot of work or really good study Bibles. So one of the things we have to keep in mind is the person who wrote this knew their Hebrew Bible inside and out. Because pretty much everything has some type of scriptural allusion somewhere in the Hebrew Bible. This is not something that was, knit together from new cloth. This is a quilt that was put together. So there's Hebrew Bible allusions. Ezekiel, Daniel are the top two. Ezekiel's also an apocalypse. It's a little more rooted in history when you read it, but stuff gets weird quick. Daniel the same, after the lion's den. Jeremiah, Isaiah, and the Psalms. Also, and this is the thing where a lot of us, it goes right over our head, it took me to get to grad school, is a lot of it is rooted in the culture of the early Roman Empire. So a lot of this stuff, the people then would have known exactly what was being referenced and what's happening, right? But unless you're like a history buff for the first century, good luck. So who are the characters that we meet in all this? Well, there's Jesus, but very rarely is he called Jesus. We meet him first as the one who is like the Son of Man. He's holding stars. He's got the 7 lampstands, which are the churches. He's got the scroll. And he's got white hair. That's a riff on the Ancient of Days from Daniel, by the way. And he also has a sword coming out of his mouth. Remember how we started with abstract paintings? Here we go. Don't need to talk to you. Well, what's the sword? Anybody guess? I have come to bring a sword. There's a riff in Matthew where he talks about how, he comes to divide families. And of course I'm blanking. It's in Matthew where he says, I have brought not peace but a sword. His gospel, right? His words. Why does the sword come out of his mouth? What comes out of his mouth? His teachings. What he says. So, we'll remember that for a little bit later. Also, so we have him first as the Son of Man with, his mouth sword, and then we meet him as the Lion of Judah, but wait, at one point they're trying to say, who can open the scroll? Remember the lamb and his scrolls? Who can open the scroll? And John begins to get all upset because there's nobody to open the scroll. And one of the people in heaven says, don't worry, the Lion of Judah is coming, right? Which is a riff on the house of David. House of David is supposed to produce the Messiah, right? What's everybody expecting of this Messiah? He's not going to wield a sword out of his mouth. He's going to have a sword in his hand. But who shows up? A lamb looking as if it's been slaughtered. That has 7 horns and 7 eyes. Go away. It's the same person. Now, 7. I'm going to skip ahead here. 7 in the ancient world's magic number. It's the number for completeness, wholeness, perfect, infinity. 7 eyes. What do eyes do? See. So 7 eyes means the lamb sees everything. Now later in the book, we get the white rider who comes. Now, we got a little oopsie in this painting. Where's the sword here? Where's the sword here? What do you think it says in the book at this point? That he wields the sword of his mouth. How does Jesus fight evil? With violence or with his words?
Well, not according to that picture.
Yeah, that picture's screwed up. That's why I put it up there. So then, as we're in the heavenly court, we also get to meet these guys. Around the throne on each side are 4 living creatures, full of eyes in front and in back. Why would they be full of eyes in front and in back? See everything, right? They're all knowing. The first living creature is like a lion, the second an ox, the third like a human, and the fourth like a flying eagle. These are all riffs on Ezekiel. The creatures of Ezekiel are slightly different, but contain those 4 elements. And they all have 6 wings. And then it reiterates, eyes are all around and inside. And they sit around all day singing, "Holy, holy, holy, the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come." Because it's in heaven, so you better be praising God, right? I mean, that's how it works. Now, it's interesting, these are the cherubim in Ezekiel. They're specifically called cherubim, and they're the ones who are designed. Cherubim are all over the ancient Near East, mythological creatures, and they are the ones who carry the throne from place to place. So again, riffing on that. Because again, we're in heaven, so crazy things are happening. These are unnatural beings, right? Therefore divine. So our next creature we'll meet on our little tour here, next character, is the beast of the sea. Roar! So he's said to have a whole bunch of heads. Scholars agree that this creature is literally to embody, symbolize the Roman Empire, specifically. Why do we think that? Well, the beast has 7 heads, and there are 7 kings. And it says the 6th head, who was struck down, but may yet return. So the 5 kings who are fallen, Julius Caesar, Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, Galba, and then the one who has not yet come, but when he does, he must remain for a little while, would be, where am I at? 1, 2, 3, 4. Nero. What's the deal with Nero? Nero was the first empire to really hammer on the Jesus followers, the earliest Christians. Nero was hated by the Christians. At one point, Nero decides he wants to build something in Rome, right, to look good, because that's what everybody else did, but there's nowhere left to build. Wouldn't you know it, there's a great fire that burns down a huge chunk of Rome. Did Nero do anything to put out the fire? No. Anyone ever heard the expression, Nero fiddled while Rome burned? There you go. Who'd he blame it on? Christians, those weirdos. So let's see, where do I have the quote here? So also, let's see. Revelation 13:7 speaks of power being given to beasts to make war with the saints. Nero was the first one to persecute the Christians. There's actually a Roman historian who writes, and their death was aggravated with mockeries, insomuch that, wrapped in the hides of wild beasts, they were torn to pieces by dogs, or fastened to crosses to be set on fire. And when the darkness fell, they might be burned to illuminate the night. So Nero used them as streetlights. That's Nero. The persecution lasted in 64 and lasted until his death in 68, which is 3.5 years or 42 months, which it said that head will rule, the beast will rule for 42 months and begin power over the earth for 42 months. So, additionally, part of the reason they think this was written later is because Rome, after Nero fell, was in civil war and utter chaos. They had like 3 emperors, boom, boom, boom. Okay? Everything is breaking down. The world is breaking down. Everybody thinks this is the end. What is the world? It's the Roman Empire, because they don't know anything outside the Roman Empire. So when they talk about the world, they're talking about the empire. Also, this head, the Nero head, talks about coming back to life. It was struck down but may return. Around this time, there's also this rumor that is scaring everyone, because by the end, everyone hated Nero. Okay? Scaring everyone that Nero is coming back. That he's either going to be, resurrected by the gods, or really he's just hiding out in the backwoods, gathering his forces. He's going to come back and take over. So that's also running around here. And then finally, kind of the last bit that really sells this whole thing. I couldn't get the Greek and all that to show up in my presentation program. That's this one. Is anybody ever heard of 666? So there's this thing with Hebrew where Hebrew is not only letters but numbers. So if you walk the Greek for Nero Caesar, if you walk it and translate Nero Caesar in Greek into Hebrew, and you add up the Hebrew, what number do you get? 666. Here, yeah, Nero Kaiser is the Greek. So then you transliterate it into Hebrew, and then you assign the numbers, and you get 666. And just for quality control purposes, there are some manuscripts of Revelation that we have that are written in Latin. If you transliterate, which means not letter for letter, Nero Caesar, the Latin, into Hebrew, give it the numbers, it goes 616. Guess what the Latin manuscripts have for the number of the beast? 616. So the beast of the land is the Roman Empire. Okay? Which, guess who empowers the beast? The dragon. Who's the dragon? Satan. And then the beast of the sea, the emperors, have their buddy, the beast of the land. The beast of the land is usually identified as the imperial cult, because the emperor isn't just a dude. He's a divine son of God, the savior of the world, who brings peace. And I mean, if he's a god, then you might as well worship him. In fact, you better worship him, or else you're not a loyal citizen. You're a threat to the empire. You're an atheist. And that's not to be tolerated. So, what does this beast do? Runs around telling everyone they have to worship the beast of the sea, the emperor. By the way, both Nero and Domitian, who's the guy who initiated the sporadic persecutions that they think this was written during, both were really into being worshipped and really pushing that. In fact, in the mid-90s, it's known that Domitian took action against members of his imperial household for atheism. So he could have been going after Christians or Jews. Jews were also blasted for that because they're monotheists. They won't sacrifice to the god, they won't sacrifice to the emperor. They're atheists. And of course, we also have, I told you about the interlude of the pregnant woman who gives birth. The dragon's going to eat the baby. So there's some allusions here. Could be Mary. Could be the people of God. Could be the church. It's kind of all of it, I really think. Remember, this is like abstract painting. It doesn't have to be just one thing. And then we have, of course, the Whore of Babylon. Babylon is Rome. Bible loves to do this. Hebrew Bible does it all the time. Don't name the current enemy. That gets you in trouble. Name the old one. In Daniel, it's Babylon, but it's called Egypt. Here, or no, pardon me, it's the Greeks. It's called Babylon. Here, it's the Romans. It's called Babylon. So, we have the Whore of Rome. Who's the Whore of Rome? Well, Rome is great. Did you know this? Rome's amazing. It's the city on 7 hills. It's the light of the world. It's so great, in fact, that it is personified by the goddess. Oh, what the heck? I didn't push my button to turn it back on. It's personified by the goddess Roma. The goddess Roma, the personification of God of Rome, who's a goddess, and this is a coin minted under Vespasian, an emperor, and you can see you have a female figure here reclining on 7 hills. Guess what the Whore of Babylon reclines on? And it says Roma there. So who's the Whore of Babylon? The personification of Rome. Rome itself. Again, we're mocking empire. We'll get into that in a little more here in a minute. Numbers, we talked about 7 already. 12, the number of the tribes of Israel. The disciples don't really factor into it. When 12 comes up, it tends to be in reference to the people of Israel, people of God. There's a whole lot of new study coming out about terms Israel and Jew and Christian and all that and how that interacts, but that's another hour. So 12, the number of tribes of Israel. At the beginning in our heavenly court, 24 elders praising God. Another fun number that comes up, 1,444. That's the number of the people of Israel that will be sealed and saved by God. Well, 144,000, 12 times 12 times 1,000 gets you 144,000. And like it says up there, that number is no practical value in the ancient world. The Romans could count up to like 10,000. That's how high they had a word for. After that, you just started, thousands of thousands, tens of thousands. You didn't actually count the number. So if it has no practical value, and it just sounds like a really big number, it's like me saying 1,000,000,000,000,000, right? Everyone? All of the people of Israel are going to be saved? Because, they're the chosen people. How? It's a God thing. So that, I hope when you go to look at it now, you'll see kind of how all this crazy stuff is actually quite grounded, right? And grounded in a way to make people look at their situation. Because at the end of the day, like I said, all these terrible beasties, what happens to them? Who has the real power in this situation? God. And by extension, the people of God. So, what's the best way to depower an oppressor in the minds of the oppressed? Make fun of him. Mocking empire, right? The whore of Babylon. You call the goddess of Babylon a whore? Ooh. But you can have fun with it. So here, I am going to read. No, I'm going to read a little bit here that talks about the various beasts and things. But I'm going to throw some pictures up that are a little different. Now, there's also scholarship coming out that says, in the ancient world, in the first century, when the first Christians were coming together, these wouldn't have been read. They would have been acted out, right? First of all, nobody can just sit there and read them. That's like one guy, right? It's an illiterate society. So it would have been acted out. So as I'm reading this and you're seeing the pictures, kind of in your mind, imagine it being acted out this way. And I saw the beast rising out of the sea. I saw the beast. There, I saw the beast rising out of the sea, with 10 horns and 7 heads, and on its horns were 10 diadems, and on its heads were blasphemous names. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard, and his feet were like a bear's, and its mouth was like a lion's mouth. And the dragon gave it his power and his throne and great authority. One of its heads seemed to be receiving a death blow, but its fatal wound, I think that's sleepy. But its fatal wound had been healed. In amazement, the whole earth followed the beast. They worshipped the dragon, for he had great authority, granted authority to the beast. And they worshipped, saying, "Who is like the beast, and who can fight against it?" What do you think they said in the imperial cult? Where is it? And also, I saw another beast rose out of the earth. It had 2 horns like the lamb, and it spoke like a dragon, and it exercises authority of the first beast on its behalf, and it makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the beast. My New Testament professor said he taught a class on Revelation, and they actually did act it out. But they acted it out as the comedy, as the mockery. And the reason I put the chihuahua up is a girl in the class had a chihuahua as a pet, and so they made a little costume with 10 heads, and that was the beast of the land. Right? I have no idea. I just found this on the internet. No. And just for good measure, the whore of Babylon. Well, he's dressed up silly. So when, if you do go home and crack this open, it can be read multiple ways. It can be read as this dark polemic, against Rome, and what do we stand for, and how do we accomplish things. This violent empire versus the nonviolent empire of God. Can also be read as that, but with the little silliness thrown in, just to, put your finger in the eye of the powerful. Kind of like an SNL sketch. So with that, questions? Do we need a minute? I know it's a lot. Mm-hmm.
Are there 3 others? Is they always say more horsemen?
So Jesus is not a horseman of the apocalypse. The four horsemen of the apocalypse, it does talk about, it's not a white one, it's a pale one. A pale horse. And they're part of this decreation, right? They show up pretty early. I think they're part of, what's the first seven? Seals. I think they're part of the seals. And they are part of, like I said, this whole decreation. I think the seven seals all riff off of the 12 plagues, actually. And they kind of parrot that. Huh? Yeah, they get a certain role. Yeah, they get one, like, so one gets pestilence, one gets famine, one gets, the last one gets death. What's the third guy get? Drought? Something like that. Yeah. Well, each of these, so you have the seven seals, and each seal has a calamity, right? And then you have the trumpets, and each trumpet has a calamity. And then you have the bowls, and each bowl is a calamity. So, again, the idea here with Apocalypse is it's people in a desperate time who are actually rooting for the decreation, right? If you're, no comment. Oppressed people are fine with the system breaking down, right? The world is the Roman Empire. So while it's terrible, I mean, that's part of what this is. That's the hope, right, at the end. While it's terrible to be living in this chaos when it feels like all this stuff is being dumped down on you, it's hard. But, you know, there are people on both sides at this time who are terrified the empire is going to end, and there's a whole lot more, not just the Christians, who are okay with this happening. Because if the empire falls apart, what gets to replace them? If you're in the Christian perspective, if you're in the perspective of John, the answer is we finally get God's empire. Because the ancient world had this myth that there would be 5 great empires. What was it? The Egyptians, the Greeks, let's say the Mesopotamians, Babylon, and then Persians, I think. And then the question was the 5th one. Well, the Romans said the 5th one's going to be them. Christians are saying God. In some ways, no. In some ways, yes. So, I mean, you know, like the questions the text asks us is, you know, what is acceptable ways of resistance? Can you capitulate? You know, at what point are you giving in too much? How do we resist? It asks us, you know, Roman Empire was all about peace, right? I wasn't kidding when I said the emperor was proclaimed as the savior of the world who brought peace. That's how Julius Caesar was proclaimed. There was a civil war then. He brought peace. How'd he do it? Killed everybody. This is also written after the fall of Jerusalem, right? When the kingdom of Judah rebelled. How'd the Romans solve the problem? They literally crucified everyone in Jerusalem. To this day, the landscape of that part of the world has changed because they cut down all the trees. To make crosses.
Isn't Revelations written also to use the Romans?
That's the coding. That's why you do the code. That's why you call it Babylon, so it can be about, oh, that ancient, you know, it's just those weird Jews and Christians with talking about their nonsense. You know, you have the big heavenly beasts and these crazy creatures. You know, because remember, the Romans are like pretty much every kind of bigot also. Like everybody's lesser than them. So the more you encode it in your ethnic, religion, you know, culture, the more they just think it's trash. That's actually how all empires work. That's also why Daniel's encoded in the same way. So I mean, this is kind of like the horror these people are going through, which is why, at some point they feel so powerless. This apocalypse is about feeling powerless to the point where only God is the way out, right? How can you rebel against Rome? It's been tried. Doesn't work. So what do? You wait for God to intervene. And hence all the heavenly armies and the woes, and we're going to break down the system, and God will act to rebuild the system. Hence why, in the end, it's all about hope. It's all about that new city that we're going to get. We're going to get through this. The system's fallen. And when it does, we'll finally get heaven on earth.
Do not sleep.
Mm-hmm.
Keep awake. Keep watch. And that just means do what is supposed to be done.
Well, and
follow Jesus in the ways that was taught by God to prepare yourself. Because there's going to be a lot of false prophets.
and that's very also Mark. Mark's big into apocalyptic.
Good question.
But it's the same concept, the idea that this is going to fall, God will establish new. And also, that was what I brought it up for. The reason I brought up Jerusalem and how the Roman Empire establishes peace is it also forces us to ask, what kind of peace do we want? Do we want this imperial peace where it's just, boom, you've been peaced? Or do we want a true and just peace where everyone gets to live in this new heaven and earth?
Depends on who you ask, huh?
Yeah.
Well, thank you. This is the one you have on this one. There's a lot to think about now.
Yeah. It's heavy stuff. It's good stuff, but it's definitely heavy stuff. So I hope you feel empowered now to kind of do your own reflection and reading and study. And maybe think about it, like I said, a little different way. So thanks, everybody. If anybody has questions, they pop up. We'll be around.